My name is Stephanie Trollen, and I'm a victim advocate with the Prosecuting Attorney's Office. Domestic violence isn't new to most of us. We've all seen movies detailing horrific accounts of physical and sexual abuse. But even though you may think you've heard it all before, I would like to share just a short story. I have an excerpt from a letter that a victim recently wrote for the court. Mary writes, "Michael was raging and yelling and swearing at me. I was trying to leave to go stay at a friend's house with my daughter. It'd been going on like this for hours, off and on, and it was getting worse. I had tried to get him to go to counseling, but he wouldn't go. He followed us when we were trying to leave the house and blocked our way. I tried to get past him, and he grabbed me and pushed me down. He had hit me the day before, so I was scared. My daughter ran out to the backyard, and when I finally got away, I found her hiding and crying. She said she was afraid to sleep in our house. I heard him punching the walls inside and breaking things. We left and went to our friend's house, who said I should call the police, but I didn't want to. I told Michael if he was violent or threatening again, I would call the police. I pleaded with him to get counseling. He still refused, but he said he would try to be better. He was better for a while. Then a couple of weeks later, he started up again. He started in on the yelling and calling me profane names. And when I ignored him, he punched the wall. I called police, and when they came, they said they couldn't do anything. The officer said they won't take him to jail unless there's serious injury. They said this isn't something you call the police about. After they left, Michael just looked at me and smiled and said, "Ha, you can't call the police on me." You know, I think when we hear a story like this, we get a picture in our minds. We cast the characters as we play out this movie in our head, and I think most of us picture an angry, aggressive husband coming at his wife and the terrorized, fearful children cowering in the corner. But what I didn't mention before I read this letter is that Michael isn't Mary's husband. He's her 15-year-old son. 15 years before Mary wrote this letter, she gave birth to Michael. She cared for him, she thoughtfully nurtured him, she read books to him. She volunteered at his school. This is the last thing she expected in return. You know, what we know about domestic violence is that it can happen to anyone, and that it occurs in intimate, interdependent, long-term relationships. In other words, families. This is the place we least expect or want to find violence. Children attacking their parents is so contrary to our ideas of what a parent-child relationship should look like. It's hard for us to believe and accept the incredibly high rates with which it's occurring in our community. Couple that with the reality that the culture of parenthood is that parents are responsible for their child's behavior. So put those two things together. It's hard to believe it's happening at all, and if it is, it must be the parent's fault. Together, this sets up an impossible paradigm for parent victims to navigate. In King County Juvenile Court, where I work, we see hundreds of such cases every year. 30% of kids booked into juvenile detention are there for domestic violence-related charges. Family violence easily makes up the highest category of violent offenses that we see. But interestingly, my office declines to prosecute nearly half of all of these referrals. Why would we do that? Well, we do it because the victims ask us to. And this gets back to that paradigm I mentioned a minute ago. What victims want when they call 911? They want to feel safe. They want the violence to stop. They want to be taken seriously and feel supported. And most importantly, they want their child to be motivated to change their behavior. But they usually don't want criminal charges. And unfortunately, that's not the deal we're selling. Instead, parents are often blamed and criticized for their child's behavior. And what's worse, is if they do choose to take advantage of the intervention services we have to offer at juvenile court, it comes at an incredibly high cost. Not so much in terms of dollars, but in terms of criminal charges. You see, we operate in a system where criminal charges trigger intervention services. You don't get help until we charge you with a crime. This is an incredibly difficult choice for parents to make. And that's why almost half opt out. And for the half that do decide to take advantage, the help always comes months after the incident. And that's an incredibly long time to wait when you're living with the problem. But luckily, here in King County, we have an idea. It's a domestic violence alternative center. This is based on a model currently in place and highly successful in Pima County, Arizona. A domestic violence alternative center is a detention alternative, but most importantly, it's a case processing alternative. For law enforcement, instead of not knowing what to do with these youth and not having a place to take them, they have the option to take them to a facility, a 24/7 facility, ideally located adjacent to a juvenile detention facility. I like to think of it as two doors. One door, you're going down the path of formal charges, formal processing, juvenile detention. The other door, it's a domestic violence alternative center. Here, a youth gets immediate crisis intervention. They get a thorough, comprehensive assessment by a master level clinician. And this assessment is important because it uses tools that appropriately weight the seriousness of domestic violence occurring in the home. The youth will also get a place to stay for a few days for a cooling off period until their parents feel it's safe for them to come home and until those next steps are really in place. And importantly, there are probation counselors co-located inside the Domestic Violence Alternative Center. This is really important because the probation officers will be responsible for coming up with a contract with the youth. This contract can include substance abuse counseling, mental health services, domestic violence intervention services, really anything that the probation officer, the social worker, the parent, and the youth think would be helpful. And there's a powerful incentive that comes with that contract. If you comply, participate, and do well, the case will never be referred to the prosecuting attorney's office. Many of these youth will never see the inside of a courtroom. So the significant differences between that and what we do now is that the youth is removed immediately and there's a place to take them. Intervention happens before criminal charges are filed. The trigger is the call for help, not the subsequent charges. And the help comes immediately, not months later. And lastly, that powerful incentive that I spoke of a minute ago. Can you imagine what would have been different for Mary if Michael could have been taken to a domestic violence alternative center? Could you imagine how satisfying that would have been for law enforcement if they actually had a place to take Michael? And how about help being offered the first time Mary called 911, not years later? It's earlier intervention, and we know early intervention is prevention. Mary and Michael are real people. They represent hundreds of families we see in King County Juvenile Court every year. The scope of this problem warrants something big. And a domestic violence alternative center is big. Thanks for listening.